And here are the headlines. Peace groups campaigning against the US war on China might be paid foreign agents, the New York Times alleged, but triggered a backlash from readers shocked at what some people are calling a neo-McCarthyist stance. In a separate story, a senior HSBC executive has been forced to apologise after he said that the UK should defend its own interests rather than simply accepting US instructions to harm China. And in a related tale, the EU admits that it made a mistake in accepting vassal status to the US in areas such as technology instead of developing an independent tech ecosystem like China did. Details there's been a strongly negative reaction to a long article in the New York Times implying that peace campaign groups such as No Cold War, Code Pink, Tricontinental and others are paid foreign agents pushing China's talking points. The evidence is that one particular guy has donated to several of them. Well, here's the problem. As every China reporter knows, China doesn't have a talking point system. I would know. I live in China, I work in China, I create daily journalism focused on China, alongside many other China journalists. I've also worked as a journalist in many countries around the world, including in the West and in the East. I've even written op-eds in the New York Times. And there's only one country I know of in which the government issues a regular series of politicized talking points to journalists to push in what they write or broadcast. And that's the United States. Here are a pair of reporters talking to Joe Rogan about America's talking point system.
So you can make an entire career in DC just sticking to the party line no matter what these people believe, and you just spit out the talkers that they literally send you. They will send you talking points. They just say over and over again.
Pull that
yeah,
sucker.
go ahead.
Pull the
Sure.
sucker out.
Oh,
What
sure.
is that like? What are the talking, like you get a sheet?
Yeah,
We would like
get an
you to
email.
discuss
Message of the day. Here's the message of the day. Here are your talking points. Top line. Then you go and you turn on Fox News. You can hear it come out of their voice.
Literally word for word.
Turn on MSNBC. You can hear it word for word from the Biden campaign to their surrogates. It's all planned, man. It's all from nobody actually thinks for themselves.
Now, the New York Times piece has triggered a backlash on social media with at least 12 organizations signing a joint letter. We stand together against the rise of a new McCarthyism that is targeting peace activists, critics of US foreign policy and Chinese Americans. Despite increased intimidation, we remain steadfast in our mission to foster peace and international solidarity, countering the narrative of militarism, hostility and fear. As the US government grapples with a major crisis of legitimacy, it has grown fearful of young people becoming conscious and organised to change the world. Influential media outlets like the New York Times have joined right-wing extremists in using intimidation tactics to silence these advocates for change. It's actually a very good letter, and I will provide a link if you want to read the whole thing. In separate but related news, a senior HSBC executive has been forced to apologise after he said that the UK should follow its own interests rather than simply accepting US instructions to attack China, it was revealed today. The UK had been weak. Instead of standing up for itself, it sacrificed its own interests by giving in to US pressure to cut back dealings with the Asian nation, said Sir Sherard Cowper-Coles. Now, this executive, who works as HSBC's head of public affairs, made the comment at a closed-door event in London in June. But someone leaked it to Bloomberg, which duly stirred up trouble. I apologise for any offence caused, Cowper-Coles said, according to the FT and other papers this morning. Now, just think about that for a moment. He's apologising for telling the truth about the existence of US pressure to take an anti-China stance, and the UK's willingness to bow to it. That's not my opinion. This is widely recognised as an issue. In fact, what this incident really shows is the growing gulf between the global business community on one side and Western politicians and journalists on the other. The first group wants the freedom to speak the truth. Business depends on the free sharing of information, right? But the second group wants the truth suppressed in favor of a politicized Pentagon narrative in which the US is painted as the world's white saviors and the Chinese are painted as cartoon villains. In fact, the HSBC man simply spoke a truth that's been said numerous times by a great many people, including top British political figures. To take an example from that country, the UK banned the world's top 5G telecoms company, Huawei, because the US told them to, said Vince Cable, the UK's former business and industry minister. Now, the equipment had been found to contain no backdoors or any problems, but the UK pressurised the UK to ban it, which it did at vast expense to the UK taxpayer and causing huge delays in hundreds of tech-related projects. And in another related story, the exact same concern is being widely expressed in Europe too. A policy brief by the European Council on Foreign Relations was actually titled "The Art of Vassalization." It was completely blunt about how the countries of Europe had been turned into vassal states, and it triggered a huge discussion. It said the US expects the EU and the UK to fall in line behind its China strategy, and it will use its leadership position to ensure this outcome. Now, that particular policy document was interesting for another reason too. It examined why America and Asia were growing fast while Europe had been left behind a bit. One of the reasons was the different reactions to America's technological dominance. The big five Western tech firms are all American. It's Apple, Google, Facebook, Amazon, Microsoft. Now, China saw the danger of this ahead, and it took the trouble to develop its own systems. But the UK and Europe, unlike the Chinese, they have been unable to develop local alternatives, the policy paper said. The result is that America's tech giants lord it over Europe too. It's interesting that this paper indirectly praises China's carefulness in not letting the US take over everything. That much criticised Chinese firewall may actually have turned out to be a bit of a blessing. It's notable too that China's tech giants are in some ways ahead of the American ones in terms of numbers of users and level of innovation in some places. The EU policy paper also said that the US has an unfair advantage in currency. Russia and China are fighting back against this capacity with some success, but Europeans have mostly just accepted it. Now think about this. Here we have an EU policy brief saying that China successfully created distance between itself and America, while we Europeans have failed to do that. Today we've looked at 3 separate incidents, but really they all have the same theme. The New York Times is using innuendo to try to cancel groups who oppose the US launching a war against China. A British HSBC banker who says the US put pressure on the UK to attack China, he's forced to apologise for his words, although they're clearly true. And the EU is admitting a hard truth, which is that their nations have unfortunately become vassals of the US in its attempt to halt the development of China. These stories may seem negative on the face of them, but actually they leave me with a feeling of hope. The backlash against the New York Times, the truth of the message of the banker, and the honesty of the EU policy officials, these are all conflicts in which the truth is trying to emerge. It's never easy to get the truth out in these situations, but it's always worth trying, even if you reach just, one person at a time. Enlightenment happens one individual at a time. That's the way it works. Eventually, I hope it will lead to a global multipolar world and, for all of us, peace.